The actress and model Chrissy Teigen once argued that her biggest parenting conundrum was why it was so hard to put someone to sleep who is already sleepy. Welcome to the Mummafesto, the podcast where parenting and politics combine. I'm Stella Creasy. I'm the MP for Walthamstow in London and the mum of 2 young kids. My guest this week is Lyanne Nicholl. Lyanne is the Chief Executive of 50/50 Parliament, a campaign that works to empower women to get involved in politics at all levels in this country. She's also a postnatal campaigner and in 2022 published her first book on postnatal care. Lyanne, welcome to the Mummafesto. Lyanne, thank you so much for joining us this week on the Mummafesto. You are Chief Executive of the 50/50 project, which people used to think was kind of pie in the sky as an idea, but actually in the last general election, we've got a little bit further, still not quite there yet. Tell us a bit about how you got involved in 50/50 and what 50/50 is about.
So 50/50 Parliament is a campaign to increase the gender representation of women in Parliament and other elected bodies across the UK. We were set up in 2013 by Francis Scott, and it started as a petition, and then it was a movement, and then in 2021 we became a charity. And we campaign to increase women's representation on elected bodies, but we also exist to inspire, educate and guide women into politics.
And what made you want to get involved in that?
So I have worked in the charity sector for a couple of decades now, and so that I've always been alive to injustice and unfairness. But becoming a mother really politicised me. It was really my experience of postnatal healthcare, which was really severely lacking. That sort of radicalised me in a way, and I became a postnatal care campaigner at that point, and sort of became involved on the margins of Parliament and politics, and dealing with MPs and trying to figure out how to get policy changes. And it became really apparent to me that you do need people with lived experience in the room to be dealing with issues that affect them. There is no replacement for lived experience, and it's really clear to me that without women in the room, in the highest offices influencing policy, that our voices and our experiences will be overlooked. I mean, that has happened throughout history, but it's happened as recently as probably last week, but also as recently as the COVID inquiry, which showed, issues that really disproportionately affected women were overlooked and neglected, and that led to poor policy making. So I really strongly believe, as well as the evidence, there's tons of evidence around this, as I'm sure you're aware, Stella. There's tons of research about how having increased gender balance, not just on statutory bodies, but on corporate bodies, makes a difference to outcomes. And it's about fairness. We're 51% of the population. Why are we still lagging behind so much on our representation? And why do we just think for years and years, we've become accustomed and conditioned to leaving it to the men? And we want to work with men in equal numbers to shape policy and legislature.
I think it's such an important point to think about the numbers. I am always very wary of the idea that women have to represent women in the room, because nobody ever asks men to speak for all men in the room. But I'm also conscious about numbers. And it's a great example you talk about the pandemic, because I have very strong memories of being in the meetings during the pandemic about how the pandemic was being handled, trying to advocate for the fact that pregnant women were completely absent from the conversation, particularly around vaccines, particularly around what their risks might be. And I was pregnant myself at the time, and I was sat in a meeting with officials who told me that it wasn't going to be an issue for them to deal with getting the vaccine to pregnant women because it was probably for younger cohorts. I'm in my 40s, I was in my 40s, I'm pregnant, and sat there going, no, women can get pregnant in their 40s. I'm a literally living, breathing example of this. but very often I was the only woman in the room talking about that issue. So the 50-50 point about the sheer number of women to allow that diversity of thought to come forward is such a powerful, important point, because we're not all the same. One of the things I've always loved is that Margaret Thatcher's diaries of her time in the shadow cabinet before she became prime minister have quite a lot of her being very frustrated at being asked to speak for all women. So actually the point of a campaign that's like, actually, we just need to get a sheer volume of women here, because then we'll stop asking women to be the every woman and start actually looking at the issues and hearing those lived experiences is such a powerful thing. But just tell us a little bit about what 50-50 is doing to practically help make that happen.
So for the last 10 years, we have considered ourselves as a pressure group, holding government to account on the numbers and why women potentially find it off-putting to put themselves forward. We've got our Ask Her to Stand campaign, in which we encourage people to look for women in their local communities who are already doing the work, already leaders, and suggesting that they might consider standing for elected office. So as well as being a pressure group, and also suggesting recommendations to the Women Equalities Committee and other aspects of Parliament on how things could be changed within Parliament to encourage more women, we go on the ground as well, and we do events and support women to become involved in politics, and that can involve things such as demystifying processes, even helping them decide through signposting and information what political party they might be interested in joining. A lot of women join us as well with the idea of becoming a local councillor. And then we are also what we consider the antidote to the Old Boys Network. We're a big network of women, friendly, supportive network. And we also try and connect women with serving MPs or women who have served, so that they can get a clearer idea of what it takes to get there and what the job involves.
And you said that you felt almost radicalised by the experience of becoming a mum. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that connects to your sense of why it matters to change these dynamics.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know many women in this country who have had a really positive experience of postnatal care, and that is not to that's not to NHS bash. They're doing a fantastic job, but such a small percentage of the maternity budget goes on postnatal care, and that has always bothered me. It feels like women are important when they're pregnant, but as soon as they're given birth, they become, well, they're abandoned actually a lot of the time. And it's as if you are treated as simply a vessel for the next generation and you don't matter in your own right. But beyond that, it's such a critical phase for a family. And you're not setting up a family on the right path if you are not putting the resource in to make sure that the health and well-being of the mother, who's normally the primary carer in the early months, is optimised. And it's the opposite. Women are, the Embrace report particularly will really strongly highlight the problems with that period. And so for me, I was okay, but I was okay because I had the resources myself to piece myself back together. And it was glaringly obvious to me that there were so many disparities, not least the racial disparities, which meant that there's lots of women who are not able to do that for themselves. And I felt that the state was failing us, and that really did politicise me and start me thinking on how we needed to get these issues further up the agenda. And then it's all the other issues which disproportionately affect women, such as violence against women and girls, the gender pay gap. It was sort of a snowball effect when I started thinking about it. And then having looked at what women MPs have done in these areas, I find really galvanising and motivating. And that led me into this part of the sector.
I think one of the things about that postnatal period, a friend of mine said to me, we were talking about how frustrated I was about the experience, about what was happening, both in terms of work, but also just your kind of sheer mental and physical health post giving birth. And she just said to me, you will stop feeling as angry as you are because you will eventually get more sleep. And it hadn't occurred to me the connection that I was motivated to want to change things and was really cross about it because I also was literally living on caffeine at that point in time.
Do you know, that is such an important thing, that, and we laugh about it because, you know, we have to, otherwise we would cry. But it is the most horrendous thing when you're trying to enjoy your newborn and trying to thrive, that you are so chronically sleep deprived. And part of the problem is that as a society, we have lost that sense of mothering the mother, and really supporting newly postpartum women. And that also bothers me.
Well, one of the things that really struck me was that the last time I had given up my sleep to that extent was when I had been a student and I'd been going out clubbing and having a great time. And then suddenly I was stone cold sober at 3 o'clock in the morning watching Netflix, not having come in from a club, but because I was with a small child who wouldn't go to sleep. And I thought the last time I actually put myself under this level of pressure was, 20 years ago. And there was a fun output at the end of it. Don't get me wrong. I think my children are a lot of fun, but it isn't quite the same feeling as like you've just seen a brilliant band and you've had a great night out.
No, it's brutal. It's a party for two, isn't it?
And I think there's a real need to understand the impact that has, because you are dealing with huge rushes of hormones and often quite a lot of medical concerns post birth. And as you say, we don't really look after the mum. You have that kind of 6-week checkup where the doctor kind of says, are you all right? I've got a box here for postnatal depression, but I'll tick it, otherwise not. And you're like, well, I might not be depressed, but I am pretty exhausted and this has been a big shock to my system. There's been a lot of work in Parliament now about birth trauma. What do you see as the sort of next stage for that in how we can support that debate to come forward?
Well, I think it needs to not be lost in, it was just before the election, I think, that came out, and Thea Clark and Rosie Duffield had done an enormous amount of work on it. But the Birth Trauma Association's been working in this area, and Make Birth Better have been working in this area for so long, and it's really listening to them, to the people who've been working for so long in this area. They know what the issues are, and they have access to thousands and thousands of women who have experienced this. I think obviously funding is key, but there needs to be a shift, I think, in how we think about and treat new mothers, and it's got to shift from being an afterthought to really putting the focus more on new mothers. And I mean, if you want my really long sort of answer to that, I've actually written a book about postnatal health called Your Postnatal Body, and that's more of a sticking plaster onto whilst the system catches up, because there is so much to be done. And I think we also really need to be listening to organisations like 5 Times More. Tineke and Chloe have worked tirelessly in this area, as I'm sure you're aware, to raise awareness of the racial disparities, which are horrendous, and the figures are coming down, but they're not coming down fast enough. And it is partly just starting to work on culture change, on how people in the system treat mothers, and also making sure that the checkups happen. You mentioned the 6 to 8 week check. I helped campaigning with that to be put back in the GP's contract, and it's really critical that we are treating that as something that is just for mothers, because totally separate to the baby, which I know Thea Clark worked on. But also making sure you're checking up not just that once. I think you need to keep going back to mums, because full well in the first few weeks, you don't know up from down. You don't know what's right, what's wrong. You don't know your body again yet. You don't know your mind again yet. There's so many changes in that first year that I really think it's also a great time. And I shouldn't be talking about policy, so I'm not going to go too deep on this, but it should also be a time of affecting change in lifestyle for women who had red flag issues in pregnancy. I think it's a crucial time to be really talking to women about their long-term health in that first year post-birth.
This really connects into the work you're doing with 50/50, because although we have become much more aware that women were not part of our democratic process, and most political parties have put in place some kind of programme to try and address that, it goes back to what we were saying at the start about that kind of every woman, like any woman will do. The big group of women who have been absent from our politics for a long period of time have been mums of young children, because the evidence shows us that time and time again in those scenarios, men will come forward and stand and then tend to have quite distant relationships from their children. Mothers tend to wait until their children are older before they get involved in politics, or women find that it's incompatible to hold a family and stay in politics. How have you found that in talking to women coming forward in the 50/50 campaign? Because issues like this about birth trauma, as you say, that lived experience, it's quite hard to combine that with campaigning and with actually being part of the political process. And yet it's a really good example of when you have those experiences directly in the room, it does change things, as both Rosie and Theo have done in being able to advocate from direct experience.
Absolutely. And I think this is, this is where you're so important, Stella. Seeing a mother of young children really visibly, you're really sort of hopefully comes across as unapologetically in the room, and doing that balance, having that balance. I say balance. None of us working mums have balance. It's a myth, but being there. And I'm juggling also as leader of CEO. I've got young children myself, not as young as yours, but it's we're showing up and it's hard, but I think it's a good example for other women. And I do think it's really crucial to have women from all backgrounds, all age ranges. I was really pleased to see some really young women coming through in this last election, but we know there is an issue with mothers of young children in particular getting into politics, and I know that you are doing work to address that, and it's something actually I did speak with Theo about before she left, and I'd love to speak to you further as well about what improvements could be made to Parliament to attract and retain mothers of young children.
You make me laugh when you talk about being unapologetic. I spent most of the other night apologising in the lobby because I had my two children with me and my son was rolling around in front of MPs as they were going to try and vote. Because he doesn't care. There's just a big audience of people. He's having fun. But obviously he kept tripping people up. So actually, like any parent, you end up massively apologising with your small children, as they're kind of licking everything in sight and jumping up and down. I think one of the challenges here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and what we can do in terms of the 50/50 campaign, is because it's very competitive to get into politics, nobody really thinks about the retention of people. So it's a sort of, well, once you're here, you will jettison your family. And certainly I know I found it very difficult just on a practical level to combine wanting to be a present representative of my community that I'm very passionate about with also wanting to be a present parent for my kids. And my partner's very present as well, and he has a very active job too. I think we often ask women to adapt to environments rather than environments to adapt to women. And so getting a broader range of women coming forward, and I'm acutely conscious that's the same for particularly women of colour and disabled women, that our political structures still expect them to be the exception who fits in rather than changing to be a place where more people can fit in, full stop. And I'd love to hear about the 50/50 campaign and what feedback you've had from people who perhaps are in that position, and what people listening to this podcast can do to help support the change in expectation that it isn't for the mums to become like the MPs, but the MPs to be more mummable.
Absolutely. I think as a society, we need to be more accepting that children are part of our life. We have falling birth rates. I think we need to be much more accepting across the board of children and working out how family life and working life goes together. I don't think it's just Parliament. I think that's a broader discussion, particularly if we want to see our birth rates increasing. We have just actually completed doing a retention survey amongst MPs, asking the MPs who have stepped down at this last election the reasons behind stepping down. And family life did come up quite a lot. So, as well as sort of more of a broader old boys club atmosphere also came up, and the abuse and harassment that comes hand in hand with public life also came up. But family life was one of the big reasons that people are standing down, and I definitely think that needs to be looked at. And we put in recommendations a few years ago with regards to looking at further increasing flexible working, and obviously that is a real key. I also know that there have been issues with childcare placements in Parliament, which is something that happens across the UK. It's reflected across the UK as well. So I think we really need to get a grip that we don't exist in a vacuum. A lot of us do have families, and instead of the personal or the public and the personal being so separated, I think we need to become more accepting in general that, especially if we want women to have full participation across all fields, but in politics particularly, let's look at the timings of meetings. Let's look at the timings of networking, as you rightly pointed out before. Let's look at hybrid working models, job shares, electronic voting. Why not? I mean, it's 2024. A lot of the stuff that we do is really antiquated, and I'm a proud Brit. I love our country. We've got fantastic traditions. But there is room for modernisation. And I was listening to a podcast the other day with the ex-leader, the ex-Prime Minister of Denmark, and she was really funny about how antiquated Britain can be and how we need to modernise. And I would love to hear from her some more on what they do in Denmark, and maybe look to other countries to see how they are being more modern and more inclusive.
I think one of the challenges is because we are considered to be the mother of all parliaments, we're supposed to be the gold standard rather than actually recognising that there may be lessons from other legislations. And I love the fact that in New Zealand there's a children's playground in the parliament. I think that would be unthinkable here. It's actually the bar that people just behave like children in it. But that's different to actually having a space where children are welcome. I would also say, and I think this is critical for the work that 50/50 do, so much of this is also about the dads and the carers and the men being not excluded, because actually a lot of my male colleagues I know really feel like they're not having the connection they want with their families because of the way in which things work, but we don't recognise and acknowledge and work to make that happen. So there is a penalty on both sets of parents, but women are particularly judged for it in the public eye. And I think that's why what 50/50 is doing is so important, because just the sheer volume of women will change that conversation because of the diversity of thought within it. Do you feel that 50/50 gets the support that it needs from across political parties, or what more would you like to see them doing to help you?
Yeah, we are really lucky, I think, with our with the engagement that we have across the political spectrum. As you know, we are cross-party. We work with all parties. We will want to and will continue to work with all parties. I firmly believe the only way that we'll get to 50/50 in as short a time frame as possible, which is my goal, is to be working with all the parties. And we have great engagement. The area that we would like to address as a sector, so that's with other organisations such as Centenary Action, Electa, Fawcett Society, the candidate selection process, because that seems to be a place where some of the gatekeeping happens. It's sort of really a high hurdle for women. The numbers of women actually selected to stand in the last election has gone down in some areas with some parties, and that's something that we would like to work with the parties on.
So obviously this podcast is called the Mummafesto, and every episode we apologise for the pun and how appalling it is. But it is about saying, what would you like to see on the political agenda to change some of these things? So if there was one thing that you would like to see the new parliament, and there's a new opportunity, there's lots of new people in parliament, lots of people come from a different background, new opportunity to have a conversation, what would you like to see on the agenda in this new parliament?
We believe there's a modernisation committee happening in government, so we'd really love to be involved in that. And then more broadly, we want firm written and spoken commitments from all parties to be heading towards gender equality in the shortest time possible. And whatever measures that they are considering to do that, we would love to work with them on.
And what would you say to people listening to this who may be political party activists or even women thinking about coming forward? What would your message be to them?
I'd say keep going. Join us. The more the merrier. We've got a big network, but we always need people who are ready to take on the baton with us. And we're really hoping to get there in the next 5 to 10 years. That's the aim. So if you have any ideas that you think you could bring to the table to support 50/50, you can join as a friend on our website, and we would really appreciate that. And just get involved with us. There's the strength in numbers, and men and women are welcome to help us continue this fight.
And what about the mums who might be listening to this maybe at 3 a.m. because they've run out of things to watch on Netflix? I mean, I felt that I eventually did get to that point with my second child where I was like, I'm watching all the Spanish teen dramas. That's how much stuff I've sat with a small child trying to feed it, staying awake. So I will eventually move on to podcasts. If they are listening to this, full of that rage, that politicization that can come from having a child and feeling that actually things aren't right, what would your message be to them?
I would say get some rest, put yourself first.
Eat biscuits, definitely
possible.
Eat biscuits.
Eat the chocolate digestives, and then turn that rage into action. It feels so much better when you're doing something about the things that matter to you, and that doesn't mean necessarily standing for Parliament. It can mean becoming a school governor, getting involved in civil society, getting involved in your local community, your local politics, and not giving up at the first hurdle, because we do hear from women, they might not get the welcome that they're hoping for. That really, am I allowed to swear on this? It really pisses me off. It's like, come on, just be a bit more welcoming to people when they're showing an interest in getting involved. Don't give up at the first hurdle, and come to us and see if we can help you, because we will certainly try.
Do you have a name and shame for organisations that are more or less welcoming, particularly for women who may be coming with their children, who maybe say, actually, I can't do really late night meetings because it's bedtime?
Okay, yeah, I can, and I hope I don't get told off for this, but we have found sometimes that when women are going to local associations, that sometimes it is not as welcoming as we would hope for women.
I'm not surprised to hear that, and I think that's across political parties, because the strength in numbers point that you make is very powerful too. I have hated, frankly, being the exception, but you feel like somebody has to kick this off. But as the exception, very often people think you're being difficult. And I would always say to anybody listening to this, no one's being difficult. They're just being different. They're coming with a different set of challenges that stop them being the brilliant campaigner they might be and the contributor they want to be. If we change those barriers, then we'll get the benefit of having them in the room. But it is really, really difficult very often to be the first person.
Yeah. And changing the status quo is really hard. But I've met a lot of women already in my first almost year in this post, and there are some such strong, passionate, bright women who really could change things if you give them a chance.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing that keeps me going, is all the brilliant people who then come into the room and you're inspired by them. It does mean you have to share the chocolate biscuits. That's the only downside of all of this, is the more brilliant women we get involved in politics, particularly the more mums that we can open up political campaigning to, the more we have to share the chocolate biscuits to keep us all going and to keep us awake, because we are all a bit tired and a bit hangry. But I'll take being hangry if it means that we get equality. That's how I feel about it.
100%. Yeah. I mean, don't get in the way of a hangry woman, a hangry new mum. Definitely not.
Hangry new women are the future of this country, I think, in many different ways. But it's brilliant to have 50/50 behind them. And we'll share with this podcast, obviously, the details of how people can get involved in 50/50. Thank you so much, Lyanne, for the work that you are doing and for sharing that with us on the Mummafesto. And I look forward to, within 5 years, basically not just gender parity, but biscuit parity in Parliament and indeed in local government in this country, because I think that's entirely possible with organisations like 50/50 fighting for it.
Thank you, Stella, for all the work you do, and thanks for having me on today.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this week's Mummafesto and the important work that 50/50 is doing to get more women into the room where decisions are being made at every level in this country. It is also certainly true that hangry new mums are a driving force for change in this country. So if you're listening to this and you're tired, please eat a biscuit, please get involved, and please listen to the next episode of the Mummafesto.